Hello and welcome back to the Future of Figure Skating. My name's Anna Keller, and this is part two of my conversation with coach and choreographer Daniel Aggiano. In this part of the conversation, we get into more detail about Daniel's experiences with eating disorders and his own struggles with bulimia as a competitive and professional skater. This is a really important topic, and I also want you to be aware of the details that we're going to go into here and prioritizing your own health and well-being. If discussions around eating disorders and body image are not good for you, you can skip ahead to about 30 minutes into this episode. At that point, we switch over to talking more about upcoming rule changes, judging systems, and how that might impact skating in the future. I should also mention that we recorded this episode before the 2024 ISU Congress, and so some of the changes that we talk about in terms of the pair rules, choreographic elements, and the qualifying system were either postponed until after the Olympics or didn't go into effect. Nonetheless, I think these are ongoing conversations and an interesting thing to reflect on now. With that, on to part two of my conversation with Daniel Aggiano. I was thinking about, as you were saying about, what a really challenging period that you went through earlier in your life and coming into skating. Was it, a refuge for you? I mean, or does skating can come with its own challenges and messed up culture in its own ways, but did it feel like, that was where you could find friends and be more accepted?
I mean, it wasn't for me about making friends. That was something like I'm very, very thankful and lucky to have some of my best friends are all skaters, and I have a few friends outside of skating as well. But for me, it almost felt like destiny. Like I was supposed to be skating. And I always thought, like having, lost my mom at such an early age that, she was the angel on my shoulder. Like I have a tattoo with the epitaph from her grave on my shoulder, and it was always I was in the right place at the right time to find skating again. And then it just took over my life in a positive way and in many negative ways. It wasn't easy to do it as an older skater. It wasn't easy to do it as someone who was overweight. And I got to the point where I had to really think, do I want to do this seriously, or am I just going to be a recreational skater, and am I going to let those coaches that told me that be right? And it was at that point when, I really got into eating healthy and losing weight. And it was at that point when I moved to Italy that, when I first got there, my coach on the first day was like, oh, well, his legs are really good, his arms are really good, but he needs to lose some weight in his midriff. And I was like, I've been here a day. This is the first thing that, the coach is saying to me. And obviously I was not in the best shape at that time, but it still affected me because I'd already lost quite a lot of weight by that point. Um,
And for that to be the starting focus point with the new skater, yeah.
and it was like, this was a new coach that I hadn't really worked with, and needless to say, it didn't work out. And I, went to a different rink, and that's where I met Rosie, who is one of the coaches at ISAB. You'll see her with the bright red hair at all the competitions.
Yeah.
She's like my older sister because her and my sister are very similar ages. So I owe my career to her. Her and her mom. Her mom is actually the founder of the Lombardia Trophy. So the Lombardia Trophy is actually the Anna Grandolfi Memorial because Anna passed away in 2015. But she was like a grandma to all of us. She was so believing in all of us, and she created the system in the rink where we were training at that helped pay for all the higher level skaters by the younger level skaters. So the lower level skaters and the younger skaters paid pretty much for the higher level skaters to be able to compete at that high level because we had such a big, it was like a pyramid. So we had such a big base that would then trickle up towards us. So we had to pay a lot less, which was, never heard of. And now a lot of clubs are implementing that. And when I walked into that rink that first day, it felt like home, and it was like Rosie wasn't a pairs coach at that time. She was working a little bit with Andren and Laura. Franca wasn't skating, wasn't coaching pairs at that time because there weren't any pairs. She didn't know anything about pairs. And so with Rosie, we grew and we we pushed and we went to Berlin to the ISU pair camp and we learned as much as we could. And we used to go to Delaware in the summer because the ice rinks used to close in Italy for the summer. So we used to go do 6 weeks in Delaware. And I was so lucky I got to work with Ron Luddington, may he rest in peace, um, and Jeff DiGregorio, and all their top level coaches there, and it was fantastic. And once Carolina and I stopped skating together, I actually went to Delaware and moved there to skate with an American girl, Emma Phibbs, um, and just to gain all that knowledge was incredible. And now IceLab is the University of Delaware, in the sense that everyone comes to us to learn. Like we as a coaching team have established such a knowledge that everyone comes to us. But it's crazy to think that if on that first day that coach hadn't said that to me, I might not have stayed there. I might have gone somewhere else. Sorry, I might have stayed there. Like
Might have stayed
yeah, I
at,
might have
yeah.
stayed there, and who knows what could have happened. And that was kind of the start of me seeing high level skating on a global stage, because in the UK we had some high level skaters, but mostly juniors. We had a couple that were going to senior worlds, and none of them were going to Grand Prix. And coming into Italy, we had a lot of high level single skaters working there. And that first year was tough. We got through it. I went back to Italy. I said I didn't like it at first, but 2 weeks later, I was like, I miss Italy. I want to go back. So then I went back and I moved in with Andrea across the street from the ice rink, and life was much better from there. But, we once we got onto the Italian team, we then were opened up to the national testing and the physios and the doctors and this, that, and the other. And, the first summer we went to Delaware, that was when I met Kimi Meissner, and training with a world champion and seeing such high level skaters. Sean Rogers was there, Johnny Weir was there. It was eye opening to me, and at that point, I made some friends there, and I saw them over the Grand Prix series, and and they would make comments about my weight, and that's when I really realized, that were people judging me because I'm still overweight? Because at that point, I'd already lost quite a bit of weight. And I remember going back to Delaware the following summer and spending more times with my friends, because I was, on that brink of turning 21. So I got to hang out with the older skaters, and I had an English ID where the date is backwards for your date of birth. So in the US, I was 21. I wasn't, but in the US, I was. So, a few nights of partying happened after training, of course. And, and they were just talking about how good it was to be skinny, and, why it's better not to eat, and just very, very toxic thoughts that then became my norm. And it was then, I remember I was drinking with some friends, partying, and one of the girls went and got on the scales, and she's like, "You should get on the scales." And I got on the scales, and it was in pounds. I didn't work in pounds in those days. I worked in kilos, and I got on, and I told her my weight, and I think it was like 155. And I was like, "Is that big?" And she was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Oh." So then for the rest of the time I was there, I wasn't really healthy in what I was eating. I was eating very, very little and doing extra cardio, and just very, very unhealthy choices. And then that continued when I got home. And being a full-time athlete and not fueling your body correctly is never good. It's never, it's never a winning formula. And I remember the last summer before we went to Delaware, we had a national training camp, and the national Italian doctor came and did, body mass index and a body fat analysis, and was like, "Oh, you're 11% body fat." And I was like, "Okay." And at that point, I was already, what, 5 kilos less than when I first got there. So that was what, like 14 pounds, I would say, less than, the year before. And I was like, "Well, what does that mean?" And he's like, "Well, if you want to stay on the national team, you have to be below 10%. And obviously, that's not helpful or conducive to someone who's already struggling. And, I wasn't public about my struggles with that. I was very much, it was behind closed doors where, I was starving myself and trying not to eat. And, at that point I was anemic during the summer because I just wasn't getting enough, energy into my body. So there was we were working with, Petrova and Tikhonov came to Italy to work with us for one of the summers we were in the mountains, and I kept fainting. Every time I got up, I would get lightheaded, and we went to the doctor. The doctor was like, "You're anemic. You're not eating enough anything. Like, what are you eating in a day? And I lied and was like, no, I eat this and I eat this. And he's like, I can tell that you're not. Like, your blood work is telling me you're anemic. So, for the 2 weeks I was up in the mountains, all I was allowed to eat was steak, strawberries, and spinach. And I was like, so, all my friends are eating pasta and salads, and all I was allowed to eat was steak and spinach and strawberries for dessert. And at that point, I became very OCD and very focused on what I was doing and what I was putting into my body. So that at that point was when I really started restricting what I was eating and making sure, it was minimal, just what I could get into my body to get through the days and not have anyone think anything of me. And then when I found out, I had to lose this 1% of body fat, um, that's when anorexia really took hold, but also bulimia, because all of a sudden I found, all these pro ana websites and songs and forums and group communities online, and thought, what, it's better if I'm skinny. If I don't eat this meal, I'm going to be better at training tomorrow. So then I can eat tomorrow. Or I haven't trained well today. I don't deserve to eat. And obviously being in America was not easy because obviously as Europeans, the fast food is so readily available over there. There's so many different things that we don't necessarily, well, we do now, but at those times we didn't have in Europe. And I remember the hotel we stayed at in Delaware had kitchens and like a welcome. It was like the Homewood Suite, so they used to have like an evening meal where you could go and eat. But it was early for us. It was always like 6 o'clock, which was really early for Italians. But I remember them having like sloppy joes and chicken tenders and
Yeah. Not exactly food that's easy to eat, that's health in a healthy way. Yeah.
at all. But obviously, being around all these Italians that were like slurping it all down because it was great, like different food for them. And in the parking lot was TFI TGI Fridays, and they used to have these Jack Daniel's ribs and shrimp that were so good. And obviously, we would do it on a Friday night at the end of training. So we'd finish training for the week on Friday night because we weren't training. We'd eat regular food, and obviously sitting with all your training mates or the coaches, whatever. I had to pretend that I was eating all this food, and I remember eating these ribs and shrimp, and it was so good. And then I was like, excuse me, I need to go to the bathroom. And I would take the fork from the table with me in my pocket and I'd go to the bathroom and I'd throw everything up. And then I'd come back and pretend like nothing had happened. Or, I got to the point where I'd leave food on the table and my friend was like, if you spill your drink on your food, you can't eat it anymore. So I started spilling my drink on my food or putting too much salt on it so I couldn't eat it. And it got to the point where in that summer, all I ate was salad during the day. And after I'd eat the salad, I'd throw it up. And then it would come to the nighttime, and obviously I wouldn't go and eat with everyone else. I'd go to the gym because the hotel had a gym, so I'd go and do cardio in the gym. And then I found like fruit parfait, which was low fat. So I'd have like 2 spoons of it, and that would be it. And it just got to the point where like I was so obsessed with what was going into my body. So like everyone else would eat, Rosie's mom used to make pasta for everyone. She used to bring boxes and boxes of pasta because there was like 20 or 30 of us that used to go to Delaware every summer. Like it was a lot of us that would go and train. And she'd bring bags and bags of food, and everyone would have their container with their names on it. And she'd always say to me, "What do you want? Because I know you won't eat the pasta." And I was like, "Just a salad would be good, or a very small portion of pasta, or just different." And a few times I'd be like, "Oh, nothing," and I'd get a packet of sunflower seeds out of the vending machine in the rink because I knew there was high protein and they were a little bit salty, and it felt like I was eating chips. And at that time, I was also going through a breakup, which wasn't easy at that age from a long distance relationship, and it got to the point where I stopped eating. Like I would make any excuse to not eat and just drink water, or do whatever I could to avoid eating. And then when I got back to Italy, we had another testing camp, and the same doctor did the body fat analysis again. Was like, "Oh, you're 7.3%. How did you lose so much?" This was 6 weeks later, and I was like, "You don't need to know. Like, you told me I had to lose it. I lost it. That's all you need to know." And I'll never forget one of the nights we were in the hotel, and everyone else was down at dinner, and I'd made my excuses and gone upstairs. And I used to do that. I don't want to give away my tricks and secrets now, but I used to leave the faucet running so that people in the room couldn't hear me throwing up. And I remember in this particular hotel, the faucet was outside and the toilet was inside another door. So the door was closed. And all of a sudden I hear the faucet turn off, and I'm like literally in the process of of doing harm to myself. And I hear Rosie's voice. And I open the door and I'm stood there with my toothbrush in my hand and tears running down my face. And she's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I have to be better. I have to be in shape. I have to lose this weight. I cannot risk losing everything because I'm not in shape." And she was like, "We need to get you help." And the thing was that in those days, it wasn't easy to find help. And it wasn't, especially in Italy. And I didn't want help. I was
Yeah.
fine. This was the thing. I was telling everyone, "No, I'm fine. I'm good." And I had some friends that were on the same journey with me and the same process with me where we would binge and purge together. And it was very unhealthy, but we wanted to be skinny. We wanted to be the best. We wanted to show the world that all this that we're putting our body through was worth it. And it was very, very traumatic. And this is where it's difficult in the skating community to only hear girls talking about this, because there are so many guys that go through it, and it's more, I wouldn't say frowned upon, because it should be frowned upon in all of the disciplines, but it's just one of those things that's just not spoken about, because we're guys. We're supposed to be macho men who
Yeah.
don't care about how they look and don't care about the comments that guys make to each other in the locker room, etc. But being told at Junior Worlds by one of the judges, he's way too skinny. What is like, he needs to eat a burger, like, and I remember always making my costumes as tight as possible to make myself look skinnier. And just you know like now with like time hop, and it tells you about statuses that you had on social media years ago. I like, they come up quite often where it's like, "Oh my God, I've gained 3 pounds this week. I'm not going to eat now for the whole weekend." And it's like, they were cries for help. Like, I was
Yeah.
literally screaming at the top of my lungs that I'm not okay. And it was just, it was accepted, and it's like, and I don't blame anyone for it except myself. It was just one of those things where it just became so normal to be so obsessed with my weight. And I remember at Junior Worlds, like the month and a half running up to it, all I ate was one salad a day, and that was it. And as soon as we did the long program, I binged so much that I gained like 10 pounds in 5 days, just because I could eat like a regular human being. And it continued with me into everything else in my career. It was like when I went into shows, the first show I did was Disney on Ice, and they would weigh us every 2 weeks. And it was triggering for me. And it was like everyone else kind of took it as a bit of a joke. And it was, this long standing thing in Disney where they weigh their skaters every 2 weeks. And when I questioned it, they were like, "Well, it's to make sure that everyone stays healthy. We don't want you, getting too underweight, and we don't want you getting too overweight. Like, we just want you to be healthy." And I was like, "Okay, but I'm seeing the girls who are struggling with this, and the guys take it as a joke. There's not many guys there that, it was affecting, but the girls that would, really, really take it personally." And it was like, it wasn't something that was healthy and conducive to these athletes and ex-athletes, because so many of us had struggled with our weight. And I remember anytime it was weigh-in day, it was always on a Saturday, and it was every 2 weeks. And if I knew weigh-ins were coming, the 3 days before I would reduce what I was eating. And the night before I would skip dinner. And then the morning of, I wouldn't drink anything and I wouldn't eat anything, because I knew I'd be heavier. So then each show has a coffee stand where you can buy food and drinks, and there's coffee. And I would have a breakfast bagel, or breakfast tortilla wrap, or breakfast whatever they were making in the morning, pre-ordered. And I would go and pick it up. I would take it to my makeup spot. I'd go do my weigh-ins, and then I would eat. And it was like just little things like that where I was so obsessed with what that scale would say and how that would make me feel as a person. And it got to the point where, like, I was traveling scales with me. I would weigh myself every day, and it didn't matter that I wasn't competing anymore. Still in my head, I was like, and I don't think it helps, obviously, being in the LGBTQ plus community, because it's a very fickle community, and they, especially the guys, they just want skinny, muscular twinks, or, you know, there's words like twink and twunk and muscle bear and all these derogatory terms that describe a person's aesthetic rather than the person who they are. And
Yeah, it can be so
yeah,
superficial. Yeah.
exactly. And it's very, very difficult to get out of that stereotype of hearing those words and not feeling good enough about yourself because you don't fit into a specific box that was created by, people who fit into that box. And it didn't matter which show I was on. I was very lucky to work in a lot of different companies. I worked for Disney on Ice, I worked for Holiday on Ice, I worked for Hot Ice in Blackpool, I worked for the cruise ships. The cruise ships don't weigh anyone. That's the only company I've ever worked with where they don't care what you weigh as long as you can do your job. As long as you can jump and you can perform as you are needed to perform, you're okay. The dance casts are weighed, and they have photos taken in. For the men, it's just in underwear. For the women, it's tight clothing. And I'm like, I understand it's part of the world that we live in of performing, where you want your performers to look a certain way, but at the same time, you have to make them healthy mentally before you can be expecting them to be healthy physically. And it didn't matter whether I was competing or whether I was doing shows. I was so fixated on what that number was. In my last year of competing singles, I was down to like 130 pounds. Like, and it was so difficult to maintain, like, and trying to get through a long program with, 8 triple jumps in it and trying to learn triple axel and rotate quads. And how do you do that when you've got no energy? Like,
Yeah.
and feeling guilty if I had a chocolate bar, or feeling guilty if, I drank a full fat Coke, because no, I should only be drinking Diet Coke. And it never really went away until COVID. COVID was the first time when I let myself live like a human, which sounds crazy, but it was like whenever I was doing shows, I was so obsessed with weigh-ins and so obsessed with, what I was putting in my body and making sure that, I remember one year on tour, my goal was to be a size 26 waist. I was shopping in kids' clothes because my body was so abnormal, because I was very big on the shoulders because I was muscular, and very tiny in the waist. And I remember my goal for that tour was I want to be a size 26 waist. And I remember not being able to find clothes anywhere that fit because I was so skinny and like skeletal, like my cheekbones were so prominent, and I still thought I was fat. And it's like I look back at photos and I'm like, because I was the fat kid growing up thinking I was fat and knowing, I was bigger than other people, that when I actually did get to be skinny and, to the point where it was obsessive, I was still too fat. And it
Mm-hmm.
was like, whether I was skinny, whether I was fat, people didn't accept the way that I looked. And it was like,
Yeah.
it, it was at that point, I kind of realized during COVID that a lot of light bulbs went off, because I was miserable on the last show that I was doing. I was working with Holiday and Ice, and the show was great. The people I was working with were great. It just wasn't the show for me. I wasn't challenged enough. It was a very last minute thing that I ended up being on the show. The show was great. It was a really, really fantastic show, but I just got to the point where I was like, I'm done. Like, I don't want to skate anymore. Like, this chapter is ending. And then COVID hit, and I was like, this is great. I get to go home. I get to finish my career. I don't have to quit. Wonderful. Then obviously it went on longer and longer than we expected. But I was lucky enough to work in a supermarket when COVID hit, because when I came back to the UK, they were desperate for essential workers in supermarkets. And Holiday and Ice were very, very gracious in the fact that they paid us until the end of the contract, a percentage of what we were supposed to get paid. So, I didn't need a paycheck, but I just felt I needed to help in some way if I could. So working in a supermarket, I wasn't doing a lot. I used to do the click and collect. So I'd walk around and collect the people shopping. So I was getting a lot of steps in, but then, working in a supermarket, you're surrounded by food all the day, or like all the time.
Yeah.
You see specials come up. We got a discount. I'd go and raid the reduced bin where they get like the stickers where everything's like they're about to throw it out, because we used to get it for free after a certain
Mm-hmm.
time. And I love to cook. I love to cook for other people. Like, I just love to cook in general. So when things would come up, I'd kind of make it like a master chef challenge. Like, right, what can I make from this? There's, all these ingredients. Let's throw something together. And so obviously after during COVID, because I wasn't able to work out because obviously all the gyms were closed, I was working 12-hour days, so I couldn't work out at home. I gained weight. And it was like it was a progressive thing. It didn't happen very quickly. It was progressive over the months that I was there. And then I got the opportunity to go to Luxembourg and got to Luxembourg and, was working a lot of hours, so didn't really take time to look after myself. And again, was just living like a regular human. Like I was eating 3 meals a day, which I'd never done before. I was eating whatever I wanted at dinner time. It wasn't like, oh, let me just pretend to have a salad. It was, let me just eat. It's like, what do I fancy today? And then it got to the point where, my clothes weren't fitting and I was like, okay, I've got to do something about it. Like my clothes don't fit. So then I got back in shape and was healthy about it and went through some different techniques. So I actually started intermittent fasting, which was really helpful for me. Like it was a way that I could be in control, but not feel guilty how I was doing it. Because
Mm.
I would eat whatever I wanted, but I would fast for however many hours, which I'm actually doing now because I saw myself at Europeans um, and was like, this is not okay. Like I cannot be a high level coach, not being healthy and not looking after myself and being a weight that is, healthy because I am overweight right now, and it got to the point at Europeans, like since Europeans, which were the beginning to middle of January, I'm already like 15, about 17 pounds down, but slowly and gradually, I've been much healthier with
Mhm.
my choices and how I'm eating. And, people say, oh, you can cure eating disorders. You can't cure eating disorders. It's something that stays with you the rest of your life. But now I make the choice to be healthier in the sense of, okay, I'm fasting and I'm very like I'm doing a very extreme version of it. I don't know how familiar you are with intermittent fasting. So you have windows of when you can eat and when you can't eat. So currently I'm doing 20 hours fasting and 4 hours eating because it just works out with my work schedule that it because it also includes the hours that you sleep. So for
Mhm.
me, it's okay like that. And but if I like yesterday, I needed to have a day off because I was like, I'm hungry. I need to eat. So I'm not as obsessed about it, but still in the back of my mind, it's like if I have to break my fast early for whatever reason, I'm like, do you need to break your fast? You don't need to break your fast. You can wait another hour, and it's like, in many ways, I'm so much better than I was, but it has got to the point where I'm like, I have to do something about this, but I don't want to do it in an unhealthy way and return to old habits because after competing back in shows, I went back to bulimia very, very easily. Anytime that my weight had gone up 1 week from the last weigh-ins, the first thing I do is like, right, I'm just going to go back to throwing up, and it's very, very difficult, to have it brushed under the rug by so many people because men are not supposed to have eating disorders. It's normal for the girls to have eating disorders because the girls are supposed to look like this, and it's like, but how do you think so many men are doing it as well? And
Yeah.
it's like that unspoken thing that just happens, and it's a shame because it is something that follows you throughout the rest of your life. It's not something that just suddenly goes away because you stop competing or you stop doing shows, and it's like I'm the first one to say, yeah, I absolutely let myself go. Like I could have been so much healthier with how I was after COVID and taking care of my body, but when you're unhappy in your life, which is what happened in Luxembourg, I was so unhappy with my job. I was so unhappy that I didn't have a social life, that I wasn't looking after myself. I turned from eating disorders to drinking alcohol every night because that was what was getting me through the misery of not being appreciated and not, you know, enjoying what I was doing to the point that, I didn't even realize when I was drinking a full bottle of gin every night. And it was just something that it just happened. And the thing was, I was like, well, I'm not an alcoholic because I'm functioning. I get up every day and I go to work. And oh, I'm not an alcoholic because I just drink to relax. And it's like, at a certain point, I was like, no, you need to calm down. Like, you've taken one addiction and gone to another addiction, and you've got to
Mhm.
find something that can help you not be addicted to anything. So now I've thrown myself into skating. So skating is my addiction now. So it's like I've calmed down on the drinking. I've really taken my eating habits into control, but it's like I have a very addictive personality,
Mhm.
and I've always had that. And so, growing up, that's why I stayed away from drugs because I was like, I know that if I go near drugs, I'm going to be an addict. And that's not what I want. So now I chose to take this back and was like, right, how am I going to get better, and how am I going to get through, and what can I do? And the biggest thing, the biggest hole in my life was my career. That's how I'm going to get through this. Like, throw everything you have and all your insecurities and all your passion and all your want to create and do something and make a difference and put it into what you do. And that's what's got me through, this last year of being here in Iceland, because I'm surrounded by greatness every day, and I don't take that for granted. And I am so thankful and so grateful that it happened, that I came here and landed on my feet. And every day I'm surrounded by these athletes who push themselves and do, everything in their power to get the dream that I didn't get. And so now I can help them do that, and that enough in return is what, was the hole that was missing in my life over the past, 10 plus years. Was I was always looking for something to fill that gap, and now the gap is being filled by the want to succeed and the want to prove all these people wrong, and to show the world that I have a lot to give in skating, and I have a lot to give in my life as well. And skating is a small part of it, but at the end of the day, that's where my passion really comes down to, is I want to be remembered for what I can give to the sport. It's like, a few people have asked me, like, what's your biggest fear? Are you scared of, spiders or, heights or anything? I'm like, I'm not scared of anything. Like, after living the life that I've lived, there's nothing that scares me. Like, horror movies, I can sit through them. I was like, I lived it. My life was a horror movie. Having to tell people at 9 years old that your mother was killed. It's not
Yeah.
something that, nothing scares me. My biggest fear in life is not being remembered, not giving enough to the world where you were forgotten, and it's like, skating has been my therapy, and I'm so thankful and lucky to get to do this as a living. People that work a 9 to 5 job, which I tried, it was horrendous. I don't feel like I go to work every day. I feel like I go and create, and I go and help mold these skaters and athletes of all different levels, not just the high level. I work with lower levels as well, but just giving a piece of myself every session, every class, every skater that I get to work with and choreograph for is more rewarding than anything else I could ever hope to do, and I really hope this year that, Rebecca and Filippo have the best season of their life, because, they warrant it and they deserve it. And it's been our progress. We've worked together, and, and it's them that deserve to have the success that they warrant. But at the same time, I'm also working with a South African pair, who just missed out on qualifying for 4 continents last season. And the same with them, they've improved so much, and I'm so thankful to be a part of their journey and to help them, realize their dreams, which is just to compete. They don't, their goal is not to be at the top 10 at Worlds. Their goal is not to be getting medals. Their goal is just to skate and be better every day than they were yesterday. And to see them last season, they beat their personal best from one competition to the next by 20 points. Their progression is skyrocketed just from being in an environment that contributes to that. And it was so frustrating that they didn't make the short technical score last year, because they did the free skate and they were so close and they improved so much. But it's just, this is what IceLab does. It creates greatness because you're surrounded by greatness, and it's whether it's the coaching team, whether it's the athletes on the ice. It's like one big family, and we all push each other and work together to get the best out of everyone, not just on the ice but also off the ice. In both respects of the coaches and the skaters. That it's a very unique environment that I'm so thankful to be a part of, and I wish more people would come and see it. Like, we've just had Bruno Marcotte here this last week, and when he sees what we're doing, he was nothing but positive about how it's going and how it's working. And it's a very unique machine that we have, and I just hope it keeps continuing to grow and push the level of everything in the sport, not just in pairs. We have high level single skaters as well, but mostly in pairs, because I resent the fact that people are telling us that the level of pairs is not high enough.
Yeah.
It's like, we're working our butts off, and we're pushing and we're training every day and trying to be unique and trying to really push the boundaries of what we're doing. Because, like I said, Rebecca and Filippo have been told, well, she can't jump. just watch us this year.
Yeah, and it's one thing for, for there to be amazing Russian teams when you're coming out of decades and decades and decades of a system that produces them. It's another thing for people, to build a program from scratch and to be able to, yeah, to pull that together. It's a different kind of it's a different kind of achievement.
Absolutely, and
Definitely.
I'm so thankful to be a part of that right from the very beginning of the legacy of it. It's if you told me, when I first came to Italy that, in 2024 you're going to have a center of excellence that has,
Yeah.
we have 10 pairs on the ice, I would never have believed you. There was two of us skating a couple of hours a day. I mean, myself and Carolina at one point we were only skating 2 hours together a week because she was at school and she couldn't get out of school, and we still made it to junior worlds. So, nothing is impossible in skating, but
Oh, yeah.
it's progressed so much now from where it was that it's not getting easier. And so when people are saying, the level is lower, I'm like, it's not lower, it's harder. Like, and a lot of people are comparing the scores nowadays to, 5 years ago. I'm like, yeah, but the scale of values has changed. You can't compare scores. It's like with the plus five GOEs, everything changed. Now there's three components, everything has changed. Before people were pushing for 90s in the short program. If you're pushing 80s now, you're doing great. Like,
Yeah.
it's hard to break 80. Like, to be honest, it's hard to even break 70 for a lot of these pairs. So, you know, it's the
When
sport
you
is
look
about.
at like what the cutoffs are for the free skate again, like we're almost back to the same level that we were when it came to, in that sort of peak in 2017, 18. It really, the level is not far off from, from that. I did a little analysis for an article that I wrote looking at that, and it's like, yeah, there was a dip with COVID, and then the right after the, after the worlds after the Olympics, when it's like, yeah, but we had no Russians, no Chinese, no Italians. And it was the post-Olympic worlds, which is always worse. And so it's like, well, of course that was like maybe like a lower, a smaller field and lower quality. It's like not to judge like the sport off of that.
And the thing was, like, COVID was so hard in all these countries and all these skaters, so it's like, of course there's going to be, a lull because there weren't many countries that could still train, but there were a few, there were a few countries that still managed to train through the pandemic. And, Italy was one of the hardest hit countries in the world. The demographic of people that live in Italy are much older. So obviously there were so many more cases here, and it was one of the big epicenters very, very quickly, so it was very difficult for the athletes here, to keep training through COVID. So it was very difficult. I mean, it was difficult for everyone, of course, but the sport is evolving and the sport is growing, and it's not helping when the scale of values are changing and the requirements are changing, and these new proposals to have a choreo lift and a choreo spin in the free skate and get rid of the choreo sequence. I don't know how I feel about that because pairs is about these big elements like lifts, like throws, like these interesting things that makes it so different from the other disciplines. It's like it's an amalgamation of all the disciplines put together. And when you take away a lift and add a choreo lift, that's very vague in the wording. We're not sure yet, what it is, what there is that they actually want. Um,
Mm-hmm.
which will be clarified, as the season begins. But we're not going to get clarifications until June. The season begins in
Yeah.
September. That's not a lot of time to put programs together and to figure out what it is that we're doing. But you know,
Yeah.
I'm not always politically correct. I do tend to have opinions, and my opinion right now is that I have to put my faith in the ISU and what they're doing, because at the end of the day, whatever they say is the rules is the rules. We have to follow it however they want it to be. I just I'm struggling to understand what direction they're going with it because right now I've heard, well, we want to make it so that there's more time for choreo, but then we've taken out a choreo sequence and added a choreo spin, which is very vague and doesn't necessarily bring anything because a pair spin was already in the free skate with a lift in
Yeah.
it as a feature. And then when you add a choreo lift, but you take out one of the big group 5 lifts, which are worth 8 points plus when you get the pluses, that's a lot of points to take out because a choreo lift and a choreo spin are going to be a base value, and then the GOE is going to affect it.
Yeah, that's my worry is that the GOE can often become political. And so then you take something that is maybe a little bit easier to be sure where you're getting your points from to something that's less so. I mean, the optimistically, I think the goal is to try to allow for more creativity and more things that are unique. And so if it can produce that, then great. But it's interesting to see this because a lot of teams, I think the teams that were trying to be creative already were pushing that, and the teams that were less so, whether because they're just not at the level that they can afford to, take their attention off of the elements or whatever, I think are still going to be, trying to find the easiest way through these elements. So it's, I, so I spoke to the head of the technical committee, Fabio Bianchetti, for an article that I wrote, and I got his take on all of this, and I talked to a lot of coaches and athletes at Worlds about it as well, and it was definitely it was interesting hearing everyone's takes on it. The thing that I found the most surprising, though, in some ways, was um, that he was very frank about the goal is to move toward a free skate with fewer and fewer restrictions to make it more of an artistic program. And and so there's almost a technical and an artistic program, and really try to move it almost in some ways almost more to closer to what it was like under the 6.0 system in some ways. Like, that is, I think, the direction that at least the technical committee wants to go. I think the full ISU, it sounds like, is not actually like on board with that. And there's the idea of having a real, like, a medal for each program and an overall medal, like that kind of more distinction. But he was very much like, that was the goal of having these choreo elements and of taking out a jump in the singles, was like, we want to
Yeah, but at the same time, it's like
that.
we're taking big steps back, and I don't know if it's in a positive light. It's like the Euler has been in and then it's been out, and now it's out again, and it's like we seem to keep taking two or three steps forward and then three or four steps back, and you know, there's a lot of work that goes into it, and I respect all the members of the technical committee that give their time voluntarily to do all of this, and obviously they get a lot of input from the coaches, from the skaters, but sometimes don't fix something if it's not broken. It's like we don't have time to get used to all these new rules and these new changes when it then gets changed again and then gets,
Yeah.
it's very, very complicated. And especially when there's now, there were technical minimum scores for a short program and a free skate. Now we're going to a technical element total for both programs combined. But then, last year the technical score for the short program was so difficult to attain in the pairs because the group 5 lasso lift was missing, and the backward death spiral was missing. So this year it was a group 3 lift and a forward inside death spiral, which was so much easier and so much lower in the GOE, like in the scale of value. Sorry. So how can you compare? It's like comparing apples and oranges, and there's no differentiation between each season. Those are the scores. And now we're completely going in a different way because now it's going to be a short program and a free skate put together, and then qualifications at Worlds. So even if you get that qualification score for Worlds, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to make it to Worlds, because you might not qualify when you get to qualifying. And it's like,
This hybrid, I'm very confused. I have not wrapped my head around how it's going to work this year.
to be quite honest, and it's like, and I'm very much for encouraging more countries to participate at championship level, 100%. And I agree there has to be some minimum level, and when we see the junior Grand Prix where there is no minimum level, and you get some of these countries that are sending skaters who are way off the field, and I'm not going to mention any country specifically, but there's quite a few that send skaters who are not even attempting double jumps, or not even attempting, to get more than a base level on a spin. I think that needs to be integrated into the senior ranks as well. But at the same time, it shouldn't be that difficult that some of these smaller countries are unable to send skaters to their world championships. It's like Ireland is a great example. Ireland, came out of Clara Peters, who was the first person to skate for Ireland. Her mom actually made the federation. She was a really good friend of mine. And she got to go to Europeans. She got to go to Worlds. And okay, a few times she didn't qualify for the free skate. A few times she did. but it didn't matter because she was there and she was training and she was of an adequate level to be there. And now with these minimums, I don't know if it's beneficial because it's not making the event any shorter, really. There's not many countries that are not sending skaters because they don't get the minimum scores. But at the same time, there are some people who are dedicating their life to get the scores that just cannot get it because it's quite unattainable, especially in the pair seasons where there's lower level elements, like lower scoring elements.
Yeah.
And, in some of these single skaters that you must have a triple and a triple double to be able to compete in a senior event, which I agree with. But, there needs to be a little bit of room for error because when you work out the base score of these technical elements, like I'll take the South African pair, for example, their base value was the exact score in the short program. And that was with a group 3 lift level 4, a double twist level 3, a throw triple, a side by side double flip, the side by side spin level 4, a step sequence level 3 or level 4. That score had to be every element at a 0 GOE. And it's like, it's
Mhm.
very difficult, and without a triple twist, without a side by side double axe or a triple, which they're just not at the level at, they're almost there this season, but it's very very difficult. And they were beating couples throughout the season that did have the scores, and it
Yeah.
was some of the pairs that did get the score only got it at one competition, but that's enough. And it's like,
And then that's so frustrating if that's, I mean, I feel like I've heard this, especially from single skaters, that, if you are worrying about you're getting your technical minimum, that is the only thing that is in your head. And so then, you sacrifice artistry to it, you sacrifice trying new things to it, you sacrifice even your own future development by like putting in a riskier element. It's like, it, it really is like, it's hard because I agree. It's like, yes, we want a basic minimum standard. And also, I look, there are skaters. I think about this with, someone like Laranaki Gutman, for example, who has her minimums now, but it was a struggle to get the short program because she has a triple triple, but she doesn't have a trip with a triple toe that she can put into the short, so it's like the way it's rigged, or not, if this is the way it's set up, it makes it hard for some skaters who you look and you think, oh, but they should be in the mix of a top level competition. Josephine Talgard, like, there's all these people who you point to who, we do have in right now, but I worry if the minimums change again. And then anyway, it's,
I'm hoping that by combining them, they're going to make it a little easier rather than harder. And the thing is, like I said, I don't mean to criticize anyone in the ISU. They do a job that I would not wish it upon anyone. The criticisms that they get in general is, people forget that all these people are working on a voluntary basis. There's not many of them that, are salaried and work there full time. But, I don't have the answers. This is the thing. I'm not here preaching, like this is what must be done. But sometimes I feel like a lot of things are trying to be done and a lot of changes are trying to be implemented when sometimes it's not what's needed. Sometimes it's just better education for coaches and judges and skaters, and rather than let's overhaul and change everything, why don't we keep it for a set amount of seasons and see how it progresses? Like the IJS now is 20 years old and it's definitely different from how it was originally. It's this season is actually going to be the 20th season. The 24-25 was it was 2004 2005 season when the IGS was implemented for the first time. It's a completely different system. If you look at the programs from those days to the programs now, like even the steps and the spins are completely different. And it's like it's evolved and it's changed. And so I don't think it's been helpful for the last, 4 6 years, where it's changed every 2 years. Everything has changed and it's getting harder and harder. And even with these changes that they're trying to implement now, like changing the spin features, it's making it almost impossible to get level fours. But people are going to do whatever they can to get the level fours because they know that if they don't have those level fours, you can't skate at the highest level. And I think that's what's taking out the artistry rather than, you know, taking out a choreo sequence or taking out this, that, and the other. I was like, why don't we make the spins a little bit easier to get level fours? Like, it's okay if everyone has a level four. That means they don't do that in gymnastics. If you've got, or diving, everyone's doing, a 3.5 somersault in tuck. They don't make it more difficult. Like, right, let's make it a 4.5. No, they want it to be done well at that level. So, educate the judges more on the GOEs so that they can be unashamed to go for a +4 and a +5. And again, I have a lot of respect for judges. I'm in contact with a lot of judges and controllers and specialists around the world, and I have a lot of respect for what they do, but there are a lot of them that need that extra education and the fear taken away more than anything of being able to go to the +4s and the +5s and the GUE, and in the components being able to bridge, the the difference between each component, because they're not the same. This corridor should not exist. If you have to give someone a 4.75 for their skating skills or their presentation, but the composition of the program is great, go to an 8. It
Right.
shouldn't be right. Well, their skating is really good, so I have to give them a 9 for that. So then I have to stay in the 8s. No, I don't want to see that. I would rather see an honest protocol at the end of an event that says, right, your presentation was terrible. You should be at a 2.75 for your presentation. Your skating skills were okay, so we'll go to a 5. And your composition, there was nothing there. I'm giving you a 1. It's
Yeah.
like, but that's how skaters learn and how skaters get better as well, because that was the original intention of these protocols, was to show where the mistakes were so that they know what they need to work on. And I feel like with this corridor, it's kind of hidden that. It's kind of swept it under the rug because now it's just a generalization of, oh, you did 4 quads, fantastic, you're going to be in the 8s.
I saw somebody pointing out how laughable in some ways it was that the unison and unity like marks got switched around between which of the components it was under. And it's like, well, what does it matter what the description is under if you're going to mark everyone the same across all of the components?
And that's the thing. Why do we separate them if it's just going to be one? Like, if it's a corridor of, I think it's a 1.5 you have to stay in, then it's
Yeah.
it's not helpful. And I really liked it, in the 22-23 season where that corridor didn't exist because we saw more judges branching out. And, Euron is a very, very good friend of mine. And, we have talks all the time throughout the season about these kind of things because I'm someone who wants to push the limits. I want to push the rules as much as possible to the boundaries of the rules. And there's many times where I ask him for clarification because I'm like, right, the rule says this. So if I did this, is that within the rules? And he'll either say, you're pushing it, or he'll say,
Yeah.
yeah, as I read the rules, that's okay. And that was the thing with going back to Eastland with the boards situation. I remember the rule that said you weren't allowed to touch the boards. And I was like, how do you feel if a skater starts right underneath you and touches the boards? And he was like, it's different. I'd have to see it. Like, I don't know how I would feel until it happened. And then he saw it and was like, actually, I find it very interesting. It's a shame she can't jump, but I found it very interesting. So it's like, I
Yeah.
do feel that needs
Yeah.
that dialogue between coaches and judges and coaches and specialists and coaches and controllers should be much more open, and athletes too. I remember at one of the Grand Prix where actually Euron came and sat with us, and I was like, "Wait, you're a judge? You can't sit." And he was like, "Why not? I'm on the panel and on the judging panel to judge you, and this is what feedback you should get." And it's only in the last few years where that's become much more common, where that
Mhm.
boundary of athletes and judges or coaches and judges has been opened, but it's not big enough. Like, especially when you think that a lot of judges are not skaters, a lot of them have not had a skating background. So I remember when we started to build more pairs in Italy, we actually went to the federation and had a seminar with the judges to teach them the different lifts, to teach them what they should be looking for. And I don't think that ever should stop. I definitely think that judges need to learn from the coaches and from the athletes what it is that they should be looking for and how things feel, because if you
Yeah.
haven't skated, you don't know that some things are much more complicated than others. A
Yeah.
forward outside counter is so much harder than a forward inside counter. But you don't get any different marks for it. It's just considered a difficult turn. A blues choctaw is so much harder than a forward swing choctaw. And it's like these little things that are not taken into account, they're just kind of all branched into steps. And I'm like, but a forward rocker is much easier than a forward counter, or a forward rocker is much easier than a backward counter. And it's, I could go into a lot about.
And then yet everyone and so everyone does exactly the same, the same patterns and the same clusters in their footwork. No, it's Yeah, I think there that piece of like what can get put in the rules versus what actually just has to be done through education, I think is really interesting. I wanted to ask you sort of my wrap up question, which is the no, this is good. I'm just the I always like to end with the question of what do you hope for from the future of figure skating, which is sort of a purposely very broad question, but if there's something that you haven't touched on or that you want to emphasize again.
I mean, I just I wish skating could go back to the glory days of the 6-0 system, to the golden era, between the 80s and the early 2000s of everyone knowing who skaters are and, skaters being household names, no matter what country you're from, people knew who the top skaters in the world were. I also wish that it was more easily available. It's so many countries, it's hidden behind paywalls, and being over here in Europe, a lot of things are not accessible unless you have Eurosport. And when I was in Luxembourg, that was one thing that was really difficult was Eurosport wasn't a channel. And if you wanted to watch skating in Luxembourg, you had to have Eurosport, but you couldn't get Eurosport. And when you did get Eurosport, it was either the French or the German, and it didn't show the skating. So skating is not easily accessible enough, and it's not it's not impressive enough in the sense of it's easy to understand. It's I think it's getting better with the commentary that we have right now, how they break down, what the little boxes mean and the colors mean and the
Yeah.
points mean, and I think that's it's helping. But I wish the sport would stop changing for the sake of changing, because we're not the beauty about the old system was that it would evolve, but it wouldn't change every year or every 2 years. And so for a long time it was just growing, and the technical level was growing, and the artistry was growing. And I'd really like to see the sport level out so that the technical level is not the only thing that's dependent. It's like if you look at the likes of the top male skaters in the world and the top female skaters in the world, the majority of them are only concentrating on the technical side, and then the component side is an afterthought. I'm very much for the idea of having a judging panel that's split, where one side does the technical and one side does the components, because I think that would help create that balance between everything.
Mhm.
Because when you get the likes of Jason Brown, who his artistry is the best in the world, but his technical level is not quite where it is or where it was,
Mhm.
he shouldn't be penalized for not being as technically adventurous as some of the other skaters. But then at the same time, when you've got athletes doing illegal elements and the only deduction is 2 points, when you're getting 20 points, 30 points ahead of your rivals, it doesn't mean anything. And I must admit, I'm very disappointed to see that they're thinking of allowing backflips and somersaults into the sport, because we don't need them. It's like, yes, they're crowd pleasers. Yes, they look great in shows, and I've also seen people land on their face, and I've also heard people breaking their necks. And Adam Sharon is one of the best skaters in the world, and the two that he did this season where he almost fell, I don't want to have to teach that. I don't want to see little kids emulating him. And he's phenomenal. Do not get me wrong. He's very talented. He's such a hard worker, and I have a lot of respect for him and his team, but he doesn't need to do a backflip. He's good enough without having a backflip. And I understand what he's trying to do by pushing the boundaries of the sport. But at the same time, as a kid that would emulate people that I saw on TV and I saw people in my rink, I'm worried that we're going to see, young 8, 9-year-old children think, oh, I saw that backflip on TV. I'm going to try it without supervision, and end a career before it begins. Because that's one thing that I really love about teaching little kids is giving them time to just go off and practice whatever they want. I don't think kids do well with constant supervision in skating. I think some of the best skaters in the world take Johnny Weir, for example, watched something on TV, went and did it, and that's how he got into skating, you know? And I don't want the repercussions of these little kids and future skaters seeing something that's so dangerous and not realizing how dangerous it is and then emulating it and then causing themselves or someone else injury. And it's not just that, you know, like the sport is definitely missing that spark and that je ne sais quoi that it had for so long. But I think a lot of it comes from the longevity of the skaters as well. You know, like we don't have the Carolina Costners, we don't have the Ashley Wagners and the Adam Rippons that, you know, lasted for more than 3 or 4 seasons, you know? It's like Alina Savchenko went to 5 Olympics. How many of the skaters that we have now are going to say the same thing? You know, I mean, obviously she's a beast. She's not your regular skater, but you know, Carolina, she went to 4. You know, how many of these skaters that we have now are going to last to be able to go to more than one Olympics? You know, I don't think we have that, the
Yeah.
superstars of skating that we used to have. You know, like if you think to a Michelle Kwan, you know, who was X amount world champion, I'm not sure exactly how many she won, but we don't have that anymore. You know, it's 1, 2, maybe 3, and then you're out. I think Carrie was the first 3-time world champion in a long, long time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a dying
And
art and a dying sport, and it's a shame.
and I want to see people, I want to see Kari skate, you know, I'd love to see her continue into another season. I think that she's getting better and is exploring different things, and I want her, her to be rewarded for that. Honestly, I was one of the things I was thinking about coming out of the World Championships this year was, I was so impressed with her performances and her, especially her free skate there was one of the most amazing things to see live and the energy that she was giving. And I felt like she was the sort of the person who got the least attention at Worlds, that the other three disciplines got much more attention. And part of that is because I was in North America, and whether when you get Americans and Canadians winning, they're going to get all the attention from that media that was there. But I just kept thinking, no, like she's getting this little asterisk next to her because the Russians aren't there, and I don't think it's very unfair.
Absolutely, because you know her double axel is the best double axel in the world by far. Like any judge that doesn't give that a +5 when it's done as well as it is, where it covers the whole ice surface, that should be what is given as an example of a +5 perfect double axel for the rest of time.
The fact that she can do a consistent triple triple at the end of her program, like it's nothing, like on the crescendo of the music. I mean,
Exactly, and it's like she's an an overall like well-rounded skater in everything. She has the artistry, she has you know the spins, she has the jumps, and it's because the Russian wonder skaters are not there that are doing all these quads and doing all these crazy position spins. She's kind of left to the side. I'm like, but I'd rather see that. I'd rather see a woman skating rather than a little child that's going to disappear. Like look at the last you know 3 Olympic games. They were all won by very young Russian girls that then didn't compete again. And it's like, okay, Medvedeva tried it a little bit afterwards, but then, she just couldn't do it. Her body couldn't handle it. And it's like, there's a reason.
Yeah.
And it's not just in the women's, it's like, there's not the longevity, other than ice dance, there's not the longevity anymore in careers. There's not
Yeah.
many people hitting multiple Olympics, multiple world medals or titles. And we need another and we need another Hanyu, someone
Hmm.
who can go through and inspire people. And I'm not saying it needs to be someone Japanese, but just someone that can do that. And I like pushing boundaries. I'm very much an advocate for that, but not when it comes to the integrity of the sport and the integrity of the health of the skaters. And
Yeah.
I think that's something that, especially in the current situation, I think certain coaches and coaches in general need to be held responsible for what they're doing. And it shouldn't be, you know, it shouldn't be, what's the word I'm looking for? Like praised that people are raising these children to do these things. And I'm not speaking about anyone in specifics. There are many coaches that are doing this. And as a coach, I find it very responsible to create something that is not able to last and doesn't leave a positive thing on the world of skating. It's like,
And like you said, that can have and so many of the things that go into those techniques that are the injuries, the eating disorders, all of the harm that can be done to the people along the way will last for the rest of their lives. And that's.
and I think that's the biggest thing that I bring into my coaching ethos every day is I don't want my skaters to ever resent me or the sport. And I don't want anyone to not be able to do what they love because of an injury or because they grew to hate it. Or, like during the summer, I had a moment with Matteo Rizzo because I taught him when he was very, very small. Like I taught him his first single axel. Um, and so we have a very, very, long-lived connection where, I always see him as little Matteo. It's not, Matteo European medalist. It's always little Matteo. Um, and he had a really bad day and he was getting so angry and he was yelling and I took him to one side and I don't coach him, like I don't have anything to do with his coaching team, and I just took his hand and I was like, go and have a skate around the ice and remember why you're here and what you're doing. I was like, don't be mad at the ice has got nothing to do with you having a bad day. Go and skate and just feel your feet and glide and remember why you do what you do every day. And he took 2 laps and took some breaths and he came over and he was like, thank you, I needed that. And I was like, you have to remember that it's not the ice's fault. It's like you're allowed to have bad days. You need to learn to cope with that. From there, you're undefeatable.
Yeah, that's great. No, exactly. That's we're in it for the long term, and it's exactly being able to connect back to that simplicity of why you're there in the first place. That's great.
Right.
Thank you so much, Daniel. This has been such an interesting conversation and so many topics, and I really appreciate you sharing your story. I'm so grateful for Daniel for sharing all of this and his story and going into such detail and vulnerability. If this episode has brought up any concerns for you, or you'd like more information or help for someone that you know who's struggling with eating disorders, one good source for information is the National Eating Disorders Association. You can find them online at nationaleatingdisorders.org. Daniel is online at Daniel Aggiano 777 on Instagram. You can also follow the Future of Figure Skating on Instagram and Twitter at FutureFS Podcast. If you'd like to send us an email, we're also reachable at fsfuturepodcast@gmail.com. Special thanks go to Ivan Daniluk for editing for this episode. Make sure that you are subscribing both on your podcast platforms and on YouTube, liking and commenting on our episodes, and sharing them with your friends. Thanks so much.